So next on our list is to make these two separate inputs for the date and the time, so it's a little bit clearer about what each of these buttons actually does. So I'm just going to head back to VS Code, and inside our date inputs, I'm just going to clean things up at the top here, and just open up the date inputs. And what we want to do here is provide some additional properties so that we can select either the date or the time for which type of input it's going to be. And if we just go back and take a look at the documentation for DateTime Picker inside React Widgets, and we take a look at the props that are available, then we have a date prop, and this specifically enables the date component of the picker. And we also have, if I scroll down, a time prop which enables the time list component of the picker. And what we can do is just get an individual time picker, and we can do the same just for the date as well. So let's go ahead. So let's add the additional properties. So I'm just going to add the date and initialize this to false, and I'm going to do the same for time as well. And then inside the DateTime Picker, I'm just going to say date equals dates and time equals time. And then over in our activity form, what we'll do is we'll create two inputs instead of just the one here, and we want these to be in line, and each one of these input whips, we want them to be identical as well. And Semantic UI React provides a form group which will achieve this. So let's add form group, and I'll say .group, and we want to give this whips of equal, so that both of these fields occupy the same width inside our form. So I'm just going to copy, or cut rather, this field and paste it inside the form group, and then just duplicate this below it. The first one will keep the name of date, the second one will specify the name of time, and we'll also pass in the first one the date equals true, and in the second one we'll say the time equals true. And if we go and take a look at our form, we now have two inputs, and I just need to change the placeholder of the second one to time. And now if we take a look, we have these two inputs, and it's pretty obvious this one's for the date, and then separately we have one for time. And that, in my opinion, looks a lot better and is a lot cleaner and easier for the users to comprehend what they need to do here. But the only thing is, if I submit this, then what I have is two separate dates and times. Whilst the time is accurate in the time property, we have the incorrect dates, and in the date property we have the correct date but the incorrect time. So what we need to do is look at combining these dates and times together. And also what we're doing at the moment, just so that we didn't get any errors, is we're using the activity dates in both of these fields, where really we want to specify activity time. But we don't actually have a time property on our activity interface. So let's make some corrections to this as well, because first of all, I don't really like using these exclamation marks on each of these properties to avoid TypeScript complaining. And our activity form is going to take an additional property to our actual iActivity. So let's head back to activity.ts again. And what we're going to do here is create a new interface specifically for our form properties. And I also want to remove this null from our date for our iActivity, which means that we have to use the exclamation marks at various points in our methods, where we can avoid this if we create an additional interface. So I'm just going to create a new interface. I'm going to call it export interface, and I'm just going to call this iActivity form values, and it would help if I spell interface correctly. And what we'll do is we'll say extends iActivity. Now I want to remove the null from dates, and once again this will break our application, but that's fine because we're going to first of all extend iActivity, but instead of extending it like this, I'm actually going to make all of these properties optional inside iActivityForm values. And the way that we can do that is by saying partial of iActivity. And this way, all of the properties inside what we pass into this are now optional. And what we'll do is we'll create an additional property for time and also make this optional and a type of date. And then over in our activity form, we can go back, and what we can do, instead of using iActivity, we can say iActivityForm values instead. Now we're still going to get an issue because our date is set to null, and we actually need to change this to undefined, because when we make something optional inside our interface, this is either the date or it's currently undefined. And I'll head back to the activity form, and making that change has given us some additional problems because now our activity ID is possibly undefined. But because this is our activity form, and I notice I've spelt activity wrong in my interface here, and that will irritate me, so I'm just going to go back and fix the spelling of this and change it inside the activity form, and also change the import for this as well. Okay, and we can remove iActivity as well while we're here. So back in the form itself, where we've now specified that our ID can be undefined inside our activity form values, let's actually make it undefined, because we won't have an ID for when we're initially creating an activity. And instead of specifying activity ID.length, we can just remove the .length and just check to see if activity ID is not undefined. And then I've still got another error, and this is on line 57, so let's go and take a look at this. And this is in the dependencies for the use effect that we're using here, so I can also remove the length from this property as well. And making this change means that we can now go down to where we're specifying our activities.date, and because our activity date is already a date or undefined, we don't need to explicitly add the exclamation mark in here, so we can actually remove these from everywhere that we put these inside. And also in our activity store, we no longer need to specify the exclamation marks in our methods inside here. So where we've got our group activities by date, we can also remove these as well, because now our iActivity inside our iActivity interface is simply set to date rather than date or null. So let's just make sure that we've caught all of them, and I'm just going to look for activity.date exclamation mark and press return. And we can also remove this from our load activities and anywhere else in our activity store. So I'm just going to remove all of these, and also inside our components I'll remove this one, and in our activity detail header this can go as well, and also inside our activity detailed info I can remove both of these. So a slight detour there, and let's head back to our activity form, and there's one other small change we need to make here, and that's to initialize our fields so that we also initialize the time inside our activity here. And we've got our dates that's undefined, that's also specified a time to undefined as well. And if we go and take a look at our form in the browser, what we should find is that we can select our dates, and we can select our time, and we can submit, but we've not really moved on from the problem that we had before, where our date is correct in the date inputs, but it's incorrect in the time input, and our time is correct in the time input, but incorrect in the date input. So what we need to do is combine the correct values and combine this into a single date for our activity date, and we'll take a look at how we can achieve that next.